there as a practice. At the same time, this has not been something which has been very much documented. That means there's not much of contracts exchange, and there is no employer-employer relationship. The issue that came about, which was widely reported, still being discussed, has to do with a particular incident where I think things cross the line, where a contract apparently seems to have been violated. So this is where the whole aspect of it comes. To my own mind as a professional, what I would say is, as long as it's not impacting the primary job, as long as it is not encompassing on the privacy of data or confidentiality or with a competitor, it's fine. And something that we are seeing more and we'll read more about. So these are my quick comments.
Okay. Prabir, let me come to you. You know, we've heard this. We've heard that as long as it doesn't impact your core job. But at the same time, we've seen a spate of sacking of employees. I mean, Wipro's done this, 300 more. And, you know, other companies have also been fairly stern. Even though the likes of a TCS, while being stern, are also saying that sacking is not the way to go. You're ruining lives, you're ruining careers. What is the solution?
See, this entire thing has to be seen as a more sociological issue, right? I think we've beaten this issue of moonlighting to death. One, I don't think the numbers really add up. You talked about IT being a huge employer. Yeah. How many people who are identified as moonlighters? So it's, to me, exaggerated. But I think it points to a deeper fault line. And a deeper fault line is where, from what I call corporate monogamy, where people built an entire career with one company a generation or two earlier, it's moved to corporate polyandry. Another word for gig, let us say, right? And the reason why it's happening is, part of it is financial, but the larger issue is for keeping skills alive, developing relevant skills. And I think the solution is not about sacking. The issue is about giving people fair exposure. And I think the ask between what skills people want to see, acquire, and the ability of an organization to do. Because the reality of any business is there's stock skill which keeps your basic moolah flowing. I think that's the mismatch. And the third point, which I think I've shared earlier also, not on this platform, I firmly believe it points to a fundamental collapse of trust and communication in many companies. The PR image notwithstanding, I think the managerial ability to connect, relate, the top leadership ability to mingle with people, listen to them, and pick these cues in time. Because rest of it, whether it's legally right, whether it is, you know, it will lead to firing. Yes, you can fire because it's a violation of the contract as exists. But you can't fire, 50,000 people. I mean, unless you're an Elon Musk, right? You can do whatever you want. So I think the solution is about improving general level of leadership conduct, maturing managerial competence, building greater trust, collaboration, recognizing that longitudinally, the fact that flexible working and working by choice is here to stay, and to what extent can we accommodate? And therefore, to me, it is all about redefining the future of work.
And in fact, that's what the minister also said, Rajiv Chandrasekhar, saying this is going to be the way of the future, where people do take time and engage in multiple projects. Sonal, what's your view? Because as Prabir said, you can't really go and fire thousands and thousands of people. But this is a real issue. And do you think a large part of it can be attributed to work from home, to the gig economy? Because in that context, yes, giant companies like a TCS or a Wipro are really stepping up the ante on coming back to office.
I think it's 50 shades of grey. There's no one answer, and you can't broad brush it either which way, though I don't disagree with any of what's just been said. But there is ethical moonlighting, and I think people know when they're crossing the line. If you can't share with your employer, your primary employer, that you are actually doing another gig, I think it speaks volumes about whether you know if what you're doing is right or wrong. So that's a fairly simple moral compass to apply. The way forward may be to say that there are two kinds of employees, and perhaps organizations have to respond to that differently. There is the long-term employee who's building a career within an organization, who wants to be trained, who wants to become a manager, who wants to have opportunities within a certain framework. There is a young emerging gig workforce, which is not looking at employment that way. And there, perhaps the rules for them need to be different. The transparency or the social contract with them needs to be completely different from what it is with traditional companies.
How much of this is about pay, Dr. Rajan? Because there was also all this furor about how some of these young freshers at IT companies are not being paid enough. There have been a lot of, various reports and comebacks from the companies, and we can get into that. But how much of this is about wanting to earn more, or is this really about, as we heard from the minister and as Sonal's echoing, about just having a whole host of new opportunities? The mic.
I was saying that the controversial spotlight is now on those Moonlight. 20 years back, Charles Handy had written a book called The Age of Unreason, where he talked about future workforce belonging to 3 distinct categories. He talked about the Shamrock organization and 3 distinct leaves that will make up the workforce. And I think that's the genesis in terms of what he had pointed out, that there are a core group of people who actually run the enterprise, who are part of the enterprise, they are more the permanent employees. Then you have a contingent workforce, which is more temporary in nature, but they're working at the enterprise. And the third is self-employed professionals who are actually there to do gig for you. And the problem here is the fact that the permanent employees, which is seen as a primary employment, the distances between the 3 are getting blurred. So today you have somebody who's actually part of an enterprise, and that's his primary job, and he's going somewhere else. But then there are 2-3 different dimensions, and you have to look at it from a statutory or a legal dimension at one end. You also have to look at the ethics and the morality behind it. And the third aspect is essentially to do with the relationship, the nature of relationship that you have. So on the statutory part, whether it's Factories Act or whether it is shops and establishment, clearly it does not recognize a possibility or support dual employment per se. But that's so much for the statute, the meaning is not exactly clear. On the ethical part of it, sometimes when we take polar positions, and here there is a conflict of interest in terms of what the employer wants from expectations point of view and what the employee feels as far as entitlement. And I come back to a specific question that you raised in terms of compensation. The question really is that why is it happening the way it is happening? And when you're talking of ethics, at one end, if I frown upon the fact that you are my employee and therefore you have no business to do something else, somewhere else, there are reasons why they're saying it. But the moot question that I have is if you refer to it as unethical behavior and you have sacked X number of people, what it also implies is that you have not taken the route to warn. And if you want to take a moral high ground, then if you're talking of ethics, should you be sacking without giving them a chance to begin with? Should you keep the income disparity in terms of compensation disparities at the levels at which they are, where if you are worried about your bottom line, an individual is worried about his safety net. So, it's a complicated matter, and today things are changing, and I'll leave it there, Aabha, we'll pick it up later.
Sure. So, yeah, go ahead, Sonal.
Sorry, I was going to weigh in about the reasons as to, is this working? No.
Go ahead.
The reasons as to why it's come into focus as much as it has today, work from home, obviously, but the fact is that there is a labor market boom. It's a seller's market at the moment. This may or may not last forever, and the tide will turn when that changes. The other thing which people don't look at is that the consequences for doing something which is on the edge or in the gray zone here, there are no consequences because you're not going to take these people to court. You're not going to sue, as you said, 50,000 employees. They lose their jobs, fine. But the whole point is that they're doing another job anyway. Yeah. So this has perhaps been a conducive environment to experiment more with this kind of thing without too much of a...
No, valid point there. Is this an issue largely to do with tech, because that's what we're talking about, that's where the debate is raging, but all of you, of course, are, have seen this across various industries. Share with me, as you said, Vineet, this isn't a new problem. I mean, how does this apply when it comes to some of the other industries, and how do they tackle it?
So here is where I started by sharing with you, and I can tell with you that this is also to do with a demand versus supply. So critical skills, when they are in demand and in short supply, some of these aspects will be there. And supposing an industry, it's not fair to name a particular industry, is really also looking at cost cutting. They would like to look at resources that can be available for a particular project or a particular assignment. They may not necessarily need it full time. So this is where a balance is struck between, for example, if it's a manufacturing area, a person after the shift or people in the weekend. And again, it's not to industry. We know about various professions. I'm just taking an example like teaching, like medicine. In all other sectors it is there, we know it. The fact of the matter is, as long as it is something that doesn't, as I said, impact the primary job. And I can even just mention to you that in the past, there have been some employers who have terminated people when this has gone to court. The courts held that where it has impacted the performance on the primary job, the company was right in doing it. Now, I'm not linking it to these particular incidents. I'm just sharing with you that this is something which has been there in our country for ages. The fact is, there is always a room for something that can be done and a limit to which it can go. In this incident, particular specific case that we talk about, I would not comment because it's not fair. I'm not aware of the full facts. I am sure due process must have been followed. Having said that, just one line I would leave. In the past, we have to see the change happening. As they say, land, labor and capital was what it was essential for an industry. I read somewhere today it is basically skill, the value I add and the access that I have. I think these are the three additional determinants that will come. So this is how I think the things are changing, and frankly, yes, there is a little crisis in some sector or some companies. There will be a way found. Employers will have to do that. Thank you.
Prabir, why don't you come in here as well? And what does the future of work look like? I know that's a very broad question, but in the current context that we're talking about, are companies going to have no option but to adapt? Is the flexibility going to be desired from the part of the corporates rather than the individual?
No, I think it will be some kind of an intersect, because one, I feel talent also is not uniform. Some people love variety, some people love challenges at the same time, and some people love stability of tenure, right? And like, I always joke, my first employer, the government of India, if you want predictability, join the government of India. It's the best place to be in. There's nothing wrong. But some people will feel bored. Someone like me would say, no, I want to experiment more. Some people say, I want to do many things at the same time. So that's on the talent side. On the organization side, I personally believe this is going to trigger something which is already happening. The construct of talent staffing will change. I think there will be a core which will remain permanent, quote unquote, because there is nothing like permanent in employment, but there will be a permanent staff. And I think there will be a lot more of the gig or part association. I think that's the model that is going to come in for one simple reason: A, cost economics, and second, for the inability of most companies to be able to offer meaningful learning and career opportunities. See, we've all been HR leaders, at least most of us on the panel here. And one of the big challenges is you cannot be a uniform career providing employer for 10,000, 50,000, 100,000 people. You cannot. It is a pyramid, right? Even if you're growing and expanding. So I think smart management thinking will be to actually look at the intersect smarter, look at your costs, provide meaningful careers, string in people who are happy, and you have to search, therefore, for talent beyond the obvious. So I think what companies will need is to actually disturb some of their historical thinking, experiment a lot more. There will be mistakes, but at the end of the day, I think the future will give us very different models of talent synergy with the business objective.
How interesting. Sonal, you were going to add to that.
I'm going to pop in with my colleagues here, all from the HR fraternity, and I'm from the other side, as it were. The future of work for the employee is going to be impacted much more than the employer. I don't know that people realize the trade-offs that they are making by going into a gig working environment or making those choices of not being in a structured career format or in a structured company. There are trade-offs, there are many benefits. But you do lose managerial experience, you do lose the ability to progress within a company, and different people have different aspirations, as Prabir was saying. But I don't know that everybody's thinking through all the pluses and minuses of it.
Okay, could I throw this question to you? Currently, the new controversy is around the variable pay cuts at some of these IT companies. Would any of you be able to shed some light on that? Because it's there's still no clarity on why they're doing this.
See, variable pay by definition is variable. The challenge is in good times we all expect variable pay to be an absolute. Sure. And when bad times happen, you're thrown out like a hot potato.
But these are not bad times.
So the fact is, at the end of the day, business will always take what is a prudent business call. But since you asked about IT, see, the huge part of the IT cost base is people. So what are the alternatives? If you exit people, downsize, which is typically the Western model. Business is down 20% or 15%, you exit people. So I think variable pay is one lever that they are playing, trying to still keep their flock together, keep morale as best as they can, but keep the sense of payout to manage their immediate economic compulsions. Please also remember that there was a time just a few quarters ago, and that's how the nature of business has become, where people were doling out big increases, huge quarterly variable bonuses. So I think, times have become, moved from VUCA to BANI, and this reality is getting reflected also in variable pay cuts or pay decisions that companies are taking.
All right, sure. Point taken. Dr. Rajan.
Going back to future of work, there are 2-3 areas where I think significantly things are changing. One, the world is increasingly becoming cognizant of hybrid realities. So it's not polarities that work, it is a recognition of the fact that you have to find middle ground. So it can't just be an employer's point of view or an employee's point of view. You perhaps need a third-party stakeholder point of view in terms of resolving issues. But coming back to the future of work from a company's point of view, what they need to be doing is perhaps a shift from engagement to happiness at work. And let me clarify, if I have to put it in simple terms, when we're talking of engagement, essentially the company is asking the individual, what more can you do for me? While we are talking of happiness at work, you're flipping it the other way around and you're saying, what more can I do for you? And so you're moving from just an organizational need and an organizational purpose to being able to create a shared vision where there's personal fulfillment. The second element, and which has got to do more sociologically in terms of the way it is, I think the youngsters have moved from a point of, when we were younger, we revere people. So, but I think now it's moved from reverence to relevance. What you offer, is it relevant to my life? Is it relevant to my personal fulfillment? Does it give room for my aspirations? So I'm with you. So therefore, I think the fundamental difference is between being compliant, and therefore, is it compliance that you're looking at, or is it commitment? Is it control you're looking at, or creating trust? Or you are in the realm of trust deficits? I think those are the things that are really changing.
Well said, Dr. Rajan. Sonal, what can we look forward to? The next 6 to 12 months are probably looking a little volatile, a little shaky. We're not sure which way we're going to go. At a time like this, even though the future for India is looking robust and everyone's talking about the domestic economy, the job market, what should one be expecting and what should one be prepared for?
In terms of the stock market?
The job market and what opportunities there will be available. The kind of increment levels, just when things were starting to steady, again they're starting to look choppy.
So I think we have, as headhunters, perhaps a little bit of a unique pulse on the market. We're a bellwether of what's going well, what's not going well. I think what we are seeing in our firm is that manufacturing or any industrial company in India has an incredible future, and they are hiring, continue to hire full steam, regardless of the stock market, because they've all made investments in the last a couple of quarters or a couple of years during COVID. The ones that are services driven go up and down with the demand globally, and IT continues to be strong in spite of everything else that's being said about it in the US. That keeps going. So.
And what can some of India's largest companies do to both train and attract the right talent? Because one of the biggest challenges is going to be training the right talent, even at some of these IT, mega companies. That's what we hear a lot about. That's what they're talking a lot about.
I have 2 suggestions, if I may, to these big corporates. It's not that they haven't been doing, but one is on building skills for the future. right? That is very critical, and it's not easy for everyone because it needs a lot of anticipation. Most companies are happier to respond, but they struggle with anticipation. So that will be very important, and a lot of it will be retooling, reskilling, moving people around. The other I will again emphasize, and I did hear some of my co-panelists talk about it, and I am very, very serious about this. The big crisis in India, Inc. actually is going to be about leadership. It already is. We talk too much about leaders. We do very little about leadership. This is a fundamental problem that I find, and training, when you're growing to go from a certain $3 trillion to a $15 trillion aspiration, where are leaders? Where are managers of substance? All these issues of moonlighting, retention, skill building, morale, engagement, happiness. I think we have very, very average managers, because companies still think of it as a cost and not as an investment, as I very strongly believe they should.
That's a strong statement coming in, and I think that's scope for yet another debate altogether. But Dr. Rajan, you look like you want to say something. Closing comments from you.
I was standing outside, and somebody came up to me and said, my company has actually sacked 3,000 people. And I wanted to hear your view. And so he was asking what I felt about it, and my only simple answer to him was that when you're firing somebody, you're firing a family, not an individual, to begin with. Second, even one drop of tear has a notion of grief behind it. So I think it's important for organizations to recognize that you're talking about creating a relationship which is not transactional, where you recognize the value that they bring to the table, and you are what you are because you're a composite of people. And the last thing I told the person was that don't ask me the answer. Imagine yourself as being one of those guys who had to move on. So somewhere I think there has to be a greater recognition of the fact that people matter. And there's no alternative to that. You can find whatever forms of work together, but at the end of it all, people create value.
Absolutely. Gentlemen, thank you so much for your time, and Sonal. Great to have all of you with us sharing such wonderful insights. And I'd like to also invite to share a token of thanks for this session, Karthik Vishwanathan, the Senior Manager, Indian Subcontinent at Qatar Airways. Karthik, do join us. Big round of applause, please. Thank you so much.